Hi again, year 13, and welcome to Markets, which is chapter 3 in your AS1 textbook. Okay, what are we going to find out about all this stuff? So, what is a market? Different types, and there's 6 there. 4 main ones are commodity markets, consumer markets, capital goods, and the labour market. But then also we have to bear in mind the term market applies to mass market versus niche markets. So what is it? Any place where buyers and sellers come together to exchange goods and services. Well, it doesn't have to be a physical place anymore. It can just be trade. So the market for mobile phones in Western Europe is nearing saturation point. So the idea of the market's all the buyers and sellers essentially. E-commerce we can deal with. You can look it up. You've got more up-to-date articles on that. Your textbook, by the way, is quite dated on this, so do make sure you're digging through your notes on it. So different types. You've got, well, 6 here, but we're going to look at these first 4. Commodity through to labour markets. Commodity markets, first of all, is a market which involves trading in raw materials. So industrial metals, precious metals, so metals, raw foods, coffee, beans, sugar, wheat. You can hear about these if you ever watch things like Bloomberg Channel, that sort of thing. It's kind of these prices for these commodities are running across the screen, a sort of ticker tape effect. Oil, obviously oil price talked about day in, day out because of our reliance on oil as a fossil fuel. For better or worse, of course. You can essentially buy insurance on the rate that you'll pay for your raw materials. So for example, if you were building iPhones and you needed nickel to put into the phones, then you can essentially, if you're thinking maybe 6 months to 12 months in advance of manufacturing the phones, then you can agree terms for that precious metals way in advance. And that's called a futures contract. And it's just to take that uncertainty out of it. Okay, consumer markets then. So essentially, market for finished consumer goods. So things like consumables, durables, so hard-wearing, big-ticket items, such as these listed, and intangibles, which would be more services, banking, insurance, hairdressing, even taxi driver, restaurant services, hotels, that kind of stuff. Capital goods and industrial goods are often mixed up, so we'll look at those. Capital goods are goods that are used in the production of other products, but aren't part of that product. So equipment, capital, tools. So for example, Caterpillar, who produce excavation and earth moving equipment for construction and mining. You don't, buy a building with a Caterpillar digger embedded in the foundations. Well, not unless there's been an industrial accident. Hopefully not. The equipment is used to build, or the building, construct the building, and then the equipment is moved away. So it's not part of the final product. Industrial goods, on the other hand, would be goods that are used in the production of other processes but are incorporated into the product. So, for example, seats made to be sold to an airplane manufacturer. The seats end up on the plane and part of the plane. Don't need to worry about that. Okay, labour market, funny enough, labour. Buyers and sellers of labour makes up the market. So, human beings go to work for an employer, and they're supplying the labour, and then the employer is demanding the labour, and that's 2 sides of the market. And you can read over that. Okay, so another aspect of the labour market is those who can't get jobs. Okay, So those registered are able, available and willing to work at a going wage rate in any suitable job and cannot find employment. Two ways to measure unemployment in the UK: the claimant count and the International Labour Organization measure. The claimant count is favoured by the UK government for reasons that will become obvious in a moment. If you are eligible and claiming job seekers allowance, then you are essentially part of the claimant count. You are registered as officially unemployed, but there are exclusions for that. So married women whose husbands work don't count as unemployed. Those on sickness and incapacity benefits, so you may be unemployed, but if you get disability living allowance, then technically you're not unemployed, you're on DLA because you can't work because of your disability. If you're under 18, then you should be at school, or you should be in training, you should be on an apprenticeship. So how could you possibly be unemployed? And people who are on training schemes at any age. So the government manages to keep those people off the books, essentially, in terms of reducing the number of people who otherwise would be registered as unemployed. Whereas with the International Labour Organization measure, they tend to be more inclusive and therefore their figure is higher, which is why the British government don't want to use it. What are the differences? Yeah, it tends to measure about 400,000 more unemployed people than the claimant count. Okay, don't worry about that. Mass versus niche market, last bit. Okay, so mass market would be, it's you're aiming really at a broad group of customers, or a broad market, you would say. We're not trying to break down the market by, or group of customers by, specific criteria like age, gender, where you live, what your income is, what your job is, all that sort of stuff. So it's very much a large, more general group, more generic group. So large numbers of products are produced for a large number of customers, like a Renault Clio, you know, these top selling cars in the UK, like Ford Fiestas, Ford Focus, Renault Clios, Vauxhall Corsas, those kind of cars. Okay. The advantages of being in that sort of a market would mean that you can benefit from mass production and the economies of scale that go with that, and the lower cost bringing in higher profitability. The downside is it's very difficult to differentiate your product because you're appealing to such a broad range. It has to be, by definition, inoffensive to the majority and therefore probably a little bit mundane. And also then there's also price competition because of the lack of differentiation. And actually, if you look at some of the best selling cars in the UK, if you look at the top 3 or 4, they're very similar styling, because it's inoffensive. Niche market, on the other hand, would tend to be a far more narrow group, more targeted group. And it may be a group that is currently being ignored by the mass market, or by the mass producers. Like lactose-free milk, high and mighty clothing, we're seeing more and more firms enter the niche for gluten-free food, for example, because they think that it's potentially profitable. You've got limited competition. You can charge higher prices, and if you ever buy gluten-free food, if you happen to need to buy gluten-free food, you will notice that it is substantially more expensive than similar mass market brands. Obviously then, one other advantage would be it allows for focused marketing. Because you're trying to target a much more specific group, you can promote the products in specific, via specific media. You can price it according to feedback from that specific group of customers, and so on. Downside is small number of potential customers, very little potential for economies of scale. Also, there's a relatively high risk. If you lose just a few customers, it may not be viable anymore. Okay, so just to review, that.